Welcome to House Transportation on Thursday, January 23rd. Before we get to our guest, I apologize real quick. Representative Pausch wanted a second.
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to apologize because yesterday during our discussion, I kind of stepped on Representative Casey and I walked away saying, oh, maybe I should have let him continue his discussion. And, I'll work harder to give the appropriate time and be recognized before speaking.
Thank you very much. This morning, we're happy to have our guest who's in high demand here in the building. So without drawing it out, Tom Cavett, our legislative economist, please take over and walk us through what we need to learn.
Okay. Sorry that we don't have a little bit more time, but I'll try to do this in a very condensed fashion. But yesterday, there was an emergency board meeting with the governor and the four chairs of the money committees in the legislature. And this is done twice a year to approve estimates of how much money is coming into the state through revenues. And it's done by fund. And this is the document that's associated with that. And at the back of that are tables that are, that they vote on. So the ones that are relevant to transportation, the 5-year one is on page 53 of that document, and you can sort of see the gist of it. But those are sort of saying, okay, that's how much money is coming into the transportation fund and will be available. And then because we do this twice a year, we sort of say, okay, relative to the last time we did it, how has it changed? Do you have more money? Do you have less money? So that's what I'll speak to initially. We relate all of the stuff all of the revenue sources to things that are happening in the external economy. And then those obviously change. And so we update, our understanding of the world and then say, okay, how's that going to affect revenues? And that's the process we're in here. So in the external economy, things went a little bit better than we would have expected. I know if you ask the average person, how's the economy doing, they'll generally say it stinks or whatever. By the numbers, it's almost never been better. I'm sorry, and economists take a lot of flack for this, especially during an election year. I address this in the report, and we're not going to have time to get into it here, but if you want to read the report, you'll see is that it can differ greatly based on where you are in the economy. If for example, if you have, the stock market went up 26.7%, that's terrific. That's good news generally. That's going to help personal income receipts, going to help corporate receipts. It's going to affect purchasing because high-end people purchase a whole lot more than low-end. When stock values go up, they feel richer. There's a wealth effect. But if you look at the bottom 50% of the population, they own exactly 1% of all corporate equities and mutual funds. So stock market goes up, it's like, so what? It doesn't make any difference at all. So yeah, if you asked a person like that, well, how are you feeling? The stock market's up, and so it doesn't, my wages may not have gone up as much as inflation. Even though the average wages, the aggregate numbers, wages have gone up more than inflation. All right. So it's not in aggregate, it's more than kept pace with inflation. But psychologically, that doesn't feel very good. If you got a wage increase, you want to feel like it's because you did a really good job, not just I'm keeping pace with inflation. And then there's the whole social media world of spinning everything. And we've seen bigger divides between sentiment on the economy by party affiliation than we've ever seen before. So there was a chart in the last forecast in July that we looked at, and you look at, when, Democrats in office as the president, and Democratic sentiment thinks the economy is good, and Republicans affiliated respondents think it's bad. And then it flips when there's a Republican in the White House, then the Democrats think the economy is bad and the Republicans think it's great. So there's that lens also that goes on to it. But We're just looking at numbers that drive revenues, and that's what matters to us. And there are different things that drive transportation fund monies than drive general fund and education fund sources. And so I just want to speak a little bit to that. But that's just the backdrop, is we're looking at an economy where real GDP growth is tracking in the fourth quarter to be above 3%. That's real GDP growth. That does not happen very often. You pretty much got to be firing on all cylinders to get that kind of growth. That's the target, by the way, of the incoming Treasury Secretary in the new administration. He's got this 3-3-3 plan, and one of the threes is 3% real GDP growth. That's going to be hard to do, but it's a goal. It's not, like it's a promise. Another one, though, affects transportation, which is 3 million barrels a day more of crude oil produced by the United States. That's also going to be a really tough one for different reasons. Right now, the United States is the largest oil producer in the world, along with pretty close to Russia and Saudi Arabia. And then it drops off to, Iran and Iraq and Canada and, some other, but the US is, right up there. But to get another 3 million barrels a day, physically you could do it, but it's going to push the price down, and the people making the decisions to drill are not the president, but the people who own the companies that are doing the drilling and doing the extraction. And if it pushes the price down, it's not going to be economic beyond a certain point. So right now, there's a pretty soft outlook on gas prices. So the US is producing and buffering shocks that could occur in other places. In this handout, so none of these charts are in the other handout. And Senate Finance had a few specific questions, but I just wanted to share some of this with you on there. But this first page is the price of West Texas crude oil. So this is sort of your oil price all the way back to 1947, and it's adjusted for inflation. So it's a real price in today's dollars. So December 2024 dollars, price of oil $70 a barrel, and the last line on the thing is the last dot on the chart is it's down to 70. But this tells you in our dollars today what the price has been over time. And there are periods where it's been very stable, but not in recent history. I mean, let's go back to the very start where you get stable prices. You can see how volatile that is. And that whipsaws vehicles people choose and how much they drive and how much tax revenue we get. And, so that's important to understand. The next chart is one that's the short-term energy outlook from the Energy Information Administration, which is a really good government agency in terms of data. It has very detailed information on energy use and energy production. And I would encourage you to go to their website just to noodle around and see stats on Vermont and other places, because it's a good anyway, they do forecasting. We don't use their forecast, but we always look at it, and several other entities that focus on energy specifically. But you can see this is their forecast for West Texas Intermediate crude oil, and then confidence bands around that. So they have it going down slightly, pretty steady, but going down a little bit. But their confidence interval is huge, I mean, as I'll tell you, the technical economic term for this is, I don't know. That's when the bands go like that. It's like, okay, could be 120, it could be 60, it could be whatever. But that's because, like in that first page, all kinds of stuff happens, like who forecasts Russia invading Ukraine and how that hits the oil price. And here we are way back in Vermont, and that's coming through and affecting our transportation fund revenues and things like that. So what happens in the world affects us, and this is one of the conduits, but energy prices are one part of it. The other part, when we look at gasoline gallonage, and these aren't charts that generally we have all this internal work with the data that we do on all the revenue sources. We process the data with statistical screens, and one of them is seasonal adjustment, because almost all the revenue sources have some seasonality to them. Sales and use around Christmas time, you're going to get a whole lot more purchasing than you do the rest of the year. We don't want to look at that and say, oh, look at the trend we're on and multiply that by 12 and we're in good shape. You adjust it for what it's been over 40 years. Every time there's Christmas, guess what? It goes up. And so statistically, you can adjust for that and say, was it a good Christmas or not? After you seasonally adjust it, you can tell. And so anyway, that's what we do with all the data. And the data, as it comes in from tax and transportation and others, is sometimes hard to otherwise understand. But this is gallonage, so the physical volume upon which a whole lot of taxes are based, the gasoline taxes, involves first of all, how many gallons did somebody buy? And then secondly, so this used to be the only thing that with the gas tax. So you had a fixed price, a fixed tax rate, and however many gallons got bought, great. But you see what happened when gas prices got really high. There started to be more and more efficient vehicles. So the fleet of vehicles became much more efficient. And then gallons purchased, miles driven were pretty comparable, but the amount of gas purchased went down, the physical volume. And that was exacerbated when governments mandated certain requirements that made it even more effective in terms of, well, those are savings to consumers because they're not paying as much for gas. They're buying less gas. And so we're getting less tax revenue. That's not good when the thing that you're trying to support is an expenditure flow that's getting more expensive. You don't have fewer roads to keep up just because people are buying fewer gallons of gas. So the thought was, okay, we'll add a price component because the prices of gas are often, this would be happening. You'd get more of a reduction in demand when prices were high. So we thought, okay, if you have a price element to it, then you'll offset when people buy less, we'll at least get some of the price benefit. Problem with that is that's the last thing you want to do to taxpayers is when price of gas goes up to say, guess what? We're taking another piece of that. We're in the game on that too. And it just exacerbates it. So anyway, right now we have a blend with the motor fuel assessment tax, which does have a price mechanism that floats between caps. It's kind of complicated, but it's a lagged price too. So it's not today's price, it's behind us price, because you have to have a hard data point to use. And then it's still based on the gallons, but the rate fluctuates with the price a little bit. Anyway, in a world where the prices are going down and consumption's, continues to go down, you're going to have a tax base that's not going to support revenues that are consistent with the expenditures you've got to deal with. And that's a major issue in the transportation fund. The other thing that's really dramatic about this is a drop with the pandemic. All right. So the pandemic hits and nobody drives for a little while. Drops off. So a lot of people thought, all right, well, when that's over, that'll go right back up where it is. But remote work has not disappeared. That's the savings that's the result of remote work, basically. I mean, there's other things, other efficiencies, but that's the main thing with that. It really didn't come back. It's sort of come back a little bit, but if you were to draw a straight line from this other stuff down there, it's still probably not back up where you would have expected, even with all the efficiency gains that are happening. And electric vehicles are part of the efficiency gain, but they're still such a small part of the whole picture. That'll grow, but and it's higher in Vermont than some states, but it's nothing like, say, California or places where there's a lot more EV adoption. I was an early adopter just to try it out. So I have a 2018 EV, and I always try new technology stuff and see, but I've had a good experience with it. But I realize that the range anxiety that people have is essentially, to me, it's like a forecasting problem. So I'm always forecasting like how many miles can I go based on the temperature and all the rest of the stuff that's going on. But it doesn't aggravate me because that's what I do all the time. It's like forecast stuff. So anyway, I'm not a very good reporter on that. But the adoption's been slow for a lot of reasons, and the incentives may disappear. Sounds like Elon Musk is actually advocating that the incentives for EV purchase disappear, not because Tesla hasn't benefited from it, but because he thinks it's going to hurt the other EV manufacturers more, and he could weather it, and they'll take market share. As long as they keep the Chinese out, because the Chinese are making dynamite electric vehicles. I mean, if that was free market, buy the best at the best price, they would be, dominating sales everywhere. Anyway, that's the structural issue. I just showed this next chart to give you an idea. This is monthly data, the same thing, of how noisy it is month to month, even after you seasonally adjust it. That's the kind of blizzard that we're looking at with the numbers. And that's why we run these programs. It extracts essentially an identical line out of that data stuff that tells us where we're at. And it's why you have to do that without just looking at the numbers that get released. Anyway, the one part of transportation that is growing with price automatically, you don't have to do anything with this, is motor vehicle purchase and use. And so that's got a growth trajectory that if you look on that table on page 53, we were looking on before, or 54, that shows growth, annual growth of more like 3% and above. It's 5% this year, but between 3 and 4% over the whole forecast period, which is above rates of inflation. If you had something like that with all the rest of your taxes, you wouldn't have to worry about raising rates in step function, because essentially the market's raising the rates for you. Prices of cars are going up. It's not like we're buying a lot more cars. We're buying more expensive cars, and the prices of cars in general are growing. So that's a tax source that's the strongest part of the E-fund, but a portion of that got stolen and put in the education fund. And so you're losing about $70 million out of that by fiscal 2029. It's still the largest single component of the transportation fund, the available one, but you'd have about $70 million more if that weren't in it. I'll tell you, the proliferation of little funds and the constant changing of formulas between funds is not good governance. It makes it harder for you to understand where the money is, what you can cut, what you can't cut, what you can manage. And the political process is about identifying priorities for the state and needs of the state. Who cares what fund it's in? If it's important, it should get funded, and there should be a deliberate process to do that. I know this is never going to happen, but there are so many little funds that squirrel away money, and it disappears. Sometimes they squirrel away before it even shows up as revenue. So it'll take a share of something coming in, like the bank tax, has a thing for affordable housing and all this sort of thing. Well, it's a credit that banks take against their deposit tax. And it doesn't show up as an expenditure. It shows up as a reduction in revenue in bank. I'm not saying anything about affordable housing or anything like that. That's great. But it should be clear and obvious. It should be like, okay, we decided we want to spend this much for it. Here's the expenditure. And, it's out there. So anyway, in transportation, what's in the fund is what we forecast. Obviously, we don't forecast motor vehicle purchase and use just for the available fund, that's why we have these source lines, which you combine it. That's what we relate to the external world. And then we just do formulas that kick it off to the different funds. But the complexity of that, I think in general, the complexity of the tax structure is a real problem. You see it with education funding, especially. There's just not that many people that understand how it works, so you can get crazy stuff happening. I mean, simplifying taxes is another thing that would be really great. Anyway. Go ahead.
Representative Burke?
Is it okay to interrupt?
Yeah, anytime. This is what
I
it's
just
for.
wondered, was it after Brigham that we
Yeah.
put the purchase and use tax gate went? to
Oh,
the end? What is that?
So the show,
I remember reading about that once. and
I don't know if it was with it or if it was a later thing. Chris, do you happen to remember?
Fiscal happened in, I believe, took effect fiscal 2005.
Oh, okay, not
So
so.
that's after.
Yeah,
Well after. Yeah.
The ed fund used to receive a portion of the gas tax. And at the time, it was swapped. So the
Okay.
T fund kept the gas tax
I see.
and the ed fund got a third of the purchase and use tax. And it was designed to be a revenue neutral swap at the time.
Great,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah. So, those decisions get made. And that's the thing, when some fund is really in bad shape, figure out how to move it from one place to another. But it doesn't happen with a blank slate each time where you said, okay, here's all the money that we have. What are our priorities? And then, spend from that. There's also a tendency you want to spend what you have in your budget sometimes, even if you don't need it all, but that's beside the point. Anyway, so that's the landscape that we're looking at. Are there any other questions? I'm sorry, it has to be so condensed, a little bit like
We have time.
drinking from a fire hose, but
We have time. It depends on how much time you have.
available to go as long as you want. But anyway, other questions about, so the last chart is just transportation fund total, but you can see that on the, growth rates on the line. Problem with this is going out, this doesn't have the forecast part. This is just history. But it grows between, what is it, 1% and 2%, maybe? Let's just look at that table. I think that's, what do you say, 53?
It's 53. I was like, okay.
Yeah, so total available, so that's down on the lower part. After this year, which is 6%, because it has a whole bunch of fee increases, and then motor vehicle purchase and use had a really good year. I think there was some advanced buying in motor vehicle purchase and use because of the tariff threat. So there have been articles about the tariffs could raise the price of a car by $7,000, depending, especially if it's Mexico, Canada get in the crosshairs. So there might have been a little bit of advanced purchasing in the first half, but anyway, and that would continue until the tariffs hit. In fact, it might accelerate if they look really certain. But anyway, growth after that is between 0.9 and 1.6, but probably averages in the low, like a 1.1 or 1.2-ish kind of thing for the entire forecast horizon. And that's, inflation's going to be at least probably 2.5. So you're looking at problems, essentially, that'll come to your committee. And what are we going to do? Because your costs are not going to grow by this percent.
Is there any information on corresponding construction paving costs and where they're, what they've done over just in general in terms of, so what you're just saying there is if our revenue forecast is to grow at 1% to 2%, which is going to be either entirely eaten up or very close to just regular inflation, but what has happened over the last X number of years with costs, did they already cross? And are we, where are we on that projection is, I guess, where you're getting at it.
Well,
Probably growing at a faster rate than just in construction and paving and things of that nature than they are overall inflation.
Right. So I haven't looked at forecasts of inputs to the kind of construction that, most affects the transportation sector. But there have been big increases, certainly post-pandemic and connected with the pandemic. Labor is a part of that mix, and that, those prices have been quite high, and availability is quite limited depending on what trades you're looking at. my concern would be, I don't know, maybe all the money that's, that's being released, with the big drawdown in cash balances, from its COVID money and its infrastructure and Inflation Reduction Reduction Act money. That drawdown has a lot of transportation projects in it. The only saving grace would be if that could reduce the need for big capital stuff over the period. But that's going to buy a lot less than it thought it was going to buy. So that's the chart on page 18 that, I was talking about. But this is the cash balances for the state, all the way up to $2 billion, dollars. And the drawdown in the first half of the year is faster than we thought, which reduces interest income that we get. But maybe on the order of magnitude of $400 million drawdown. I think that was also accelerated because there was fear that the federal government would try to claw some of the money back if it wasn't used. Doug Farnham is the guy who, in the administration, is kind of orchestrating that, trying to get it out and get it used and all the rest. So he could certainly provide more detail on that issue. But to the extent there are a lot of construction projects that are taking advantage of that money, that's kind of the only saving grace. You do have a problem, though, if $400 million you're trying to spend in a year or two, the total construction market for all of Vermont, construction starts is probably about $1.1 billion, maybe $1.2 billion. And so you put $400 million into that, it's just hard to find contractors. And we would suck in contractors from surrounding states if it were just a Vermont expenditure. But every state has that same kind of money. Everybody, Vermont got a little bit more in per capita basis on some of them, just because we have 2 senators, and so does New York State, and the voting thing had a minimum. So little states ended up getting more per capita, but still the other states have a lot of money. It's not like we can use a New Hampshire company because we have a bunch of road projects and they don't. And there's going to be a lot of demand for this. So I have no idea what the inflation might be on projects, but I'm sure I would be surprised if it's not quite a bit more than the 1% to 2%. Could even exceed inflation. Paving costs do use petroleum-based products, so softness on that price would help a little bit. But it's not like we're expecting prices drop to $10 a barrel.
So if I hear on the radio on the way in this morning about how transportation revenues have outperformed expectations, and it sounds very rosy, every news report, every 20 minutes on the ride up here, I had extra far to go this morning, so I heard it four or five times.
Yeah.
But when I look at chart on page 53, and if you could delve into 53 a little bit more, just in terms of
Yeah, sure.
this trend of where it's kind of been up and down, and now we've had some real positives, but now your forecasts are all 1.2, 1.9, 1. So maybe we can delve into that a little bit. But
Yeah,
I saw here on the news, transportation, great, 5 times this morning. But I'm also trying to paint to a picture to the committee that we've got a long-term problem to tackle. They don't match. The public perception right this minute and this problem you're highlighting don't come together.
Yeah,
I was hoping you could walk us a little bit more into page 53 a little bit.
Getting the press to understand anything beyond a news bite, like a little bite kind of clip, is difficult. And very often I get questions that, nobody's read what's been written. They're just looking for a quick little line like that. And that derives from the table on page 14, which is the bottom line of the forecast, which is saying, okay, what's changed since July? We did this forecast in July. What's changed since then? Do you have more money or do you have less money than we expected? All right. And the answer is very little has changed since July. The bottom line is the difference in all 3 funds, between January and July is $60 million. And that's 1.8% difference. That's nothing to write home about. All right. That's like, if we get every forecast within 1.8%, geez, I'd be really happy. It's 1.4% difference later, 1%, 0.50, almost nothing, fiscal 29. So this is a very modest change. Just means relative to July, the transportation fund is getting a little bit more, a whopping $3 million more is what, the adjustment was. And it's largely based on motor vehicle purchase and use. So that's been running hot. And there are reasons we think if the tariff threat keeps going, with the reason we think it'll run hot the second half of the year. All right. So, but almost nothing by the time you're out in T-Fund a little bit farther. But it's the level that matters. The level is what's on the tables. That's what the E-Board voted on, were those tables at the end, saying that's what we adopt as what we're going to assume is happening with money flowing in. So I would point people to that. But let's go through the different things on that. But that's a table, anybody wanting to know kind of what's happening. So gasoline, we talked about the price softness and the fact that gallonage is still declining. So you're not getting rescued with price and you're not getting rescued with volume. So that is being declines going out net. Diesel's kind of in the same boat. It's
Sorry.
becoming,
Which table are we looking at?
okay, page 53.
Yep.
And
2A or 2?
okay, so the first one, the source one, is before anything gets taken out and given away to any other fund. And so that's important to understand because that's what's related to the external economics. The table below that, the available transportation fund, and you can ignore TIB because TIB is not a part of the available transportation fund, but it does obviously affect, bonding and such. But that's the money that you're going to be working with. And so with gas and diesel, you're getting 100%. Great. They're all declining. Over the period, they're both declining because there's a lot of incentive to be more efficient, and prices are not expected to escalate rapidly if we're producing more oil and we don't have any huge geopolitical disruption. It's going to go down. So then you get to purchase and use. That's a bright spot. 5% this year, 3.5%, 4%, 3.2%, 3.1%. 3 to 4-ish mostly. That's good. Motor vehicle fees. If you raise fees, it goes up. But if you don't, it's pretty much dead in the water. You get a little bit of churning with stuff that has to do with economic growth. So oversized permits and, title certificates and, all the stuff that, can be in, actually title certificates are in other revenue, but motor vehicle fees have a lot of, it's registration stuff, mostly driver's licenses, but that's population based and so unless you raise rates, that's also pretty flat.
Yeah, and I think this line shows the rates were raised a year and a
Yeah.
half ago.
Yeah, that's how you get growth.
There's a bump there.
Yeah.
But it doesn't keep going.
No.
It just brought it up, bump, and.
Right. If you index the fee to inflation, then, and it'd be automatic, politically, that would be easier too. But because every time you raise them, it's like, oh, those guys in Montpelier are raising the rates again. Well, you want roads, you don't like potholes, and you want to have the roads plowed. You'll get a lot of complaints on that if it doesn't happen. So you need money to do that. But anyway.
And I think at the time, we were pulling money out of the general fund to bolster the transportation fund.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so this year, well, we'll see what happens, but we don't expect it.
To
this
be
year.
able to maximize federal highway money,
Right.
we needed general fund.
That's
to do that.
That should be a colossal no-brainer because when you use federal money, it just like saves taxpayers enormous amounts of money. that would be so foolhardy not to get as much of that as possible.
Which as for newer members, I can say that I've only been here 3 years, but that you hear right from the beginning. It is the Vermont policy in general to maximize federal dollars, and that's why you hear that it's very understanding difference between T-fund money and general fund money and what we're going to use to maximize our federal highway. And
Yeah, no, if I run an economic impact model and I don't use federal money, you get one result, put the federal money in, and because, I mean, we pay a little piece of the federal money, but what's coming back has enormous impact because we don't have to tax to get it. So if you tax to get it, you get an offset in purchasing power from everybody paying the tax. And then you get all the construction activity and other stuff like that, and a little bit of efficiency gain in time to drive and all that. But, it would be kind of a wash. But yeah, it makes all kinds of sense to do that. So that's smart. So anyway, one anomaly with motor vehicle fees is registrations are the biggest part of that. And you can get a 1-year registration or a 2-year registration. You get a 2-year registration, the money comes in that year, but it's for 2 years. And early on in that program, maybe a couple years after it's passed, we were tracking it because we're going to get less revenue the next year. We got a bump with a 2-year thing. But when they were printing, and this was before anything was done online, they used to mail out everything, and they forgot to print the 2-year option, right? And so they only went out with a 1-year thing after it had been done. So you had people that were used to doing 2-year things before, didn't have the option, so they paid their 1-year thing. But then the next year, you got a big jump in 2 years because all the people that were regularly doing the 2-year thing going, plus the people that were denied the opportunity to do it. And so you got this revenue surge that became a 2-year cycle. And for a long time, motor vehicle fees would go up, down, up, down, up, down like this. And it was only because of this echo of a mistake that was made long past. And you still see a little bit of that in the data today. So so even the variation of 0.9 to 0.7, 0.8, 0.7. So the oscillation has narrowed over the years, but it's still there.
Representative White had a question.
Just, yeah, on the federal funds conversation, just from what I'm learning, that it makes perfect sense to maximize federal funds,
Yeah.
but there are also some provisions when we use federal funds, like I think we've talked about highways that are built totally with federal funds. We can't do anything like put a toll on them, and the
Right.
welcome centers built completely with federal funds. So again, we can't do anything at a welcome
Commercial
center
maybe or something.
to raise money.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Gas station.
Yeah. And is that because we paid no match and it was completely funded by federal dollars, or?
I don't know. I mean, that's an intricacy of
Just
it.
trying to-
Yeah, there are always strings,
Yeah.
and same with state money that goes out to people and businesses. There are usually strings because you want accountability. But yeah, the thing with tolls, that's been mentioned as, that would be a great source of revenue because you'd be getting a lot of the traffic that comes from out of state. And, if you had tolls at the borders, and that's a way to shift tax, to out of state payers but that's the reason we don't. Interesting. So even with those caveats, I still think it's probably the economic benefits are huge as opposed to taxing people. I presume they would allow volunteers, right? There's a volunteer thing at the welcome centers, isn't there? I think there was some product placement things where Vermont entities would do it, but the welcome centers at some point had a volunteer component. Maybe they don't now, but anyway.
Coffee.
The coffee, but that's a safety thing too, if you're giving coffee to drivers, yeah, but it was voluntary, wasn't it?
Yes.
I mean, you didn't have to, yeah,
coffee's volunteer.
right. So, but yeah, you could justify that.
Madam Keyser has a.
I'm
So
sorry.
I got maybe a freshman question here. I see that the transfer to the education fund's about $50 million a year now.
it'll
Well, it
grow to
was
70
48 million
million.
in 20 and 24, according to these figures.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's 50 million this year. And so I was hearing that was there was a transfer of funds that went, and it was considered a wash. Is there any analysis to see how poorly the transportation fund made out in that wash?
100 million,
Just about 100 million. Okay,
when it was implemented in 2004.
well, then anyway, I was just.
Wasn't it 100 million?
Around that, I think.
Ballpark, yeah.
Okay,
That was the
so,
cost of
We've done
the
that.
transportation fund?
so they reduced the amount available to, so that we can educate or put it to education. All right, got that. All right, so now we're going into a major, hopefully a major rewrite of the education funding system. Is there any components within that, and I know it's early, any components in that to fix the error that was made?
Should ask, I mean, it's
I could certainly.
I'm
want to
just,
speak-
because we're on,
Political.
we're on the same wavelength.
Yeah,
But that's our committee discussion.
That is.
Okay.
I don't know. I can tell you that speaker hears about it every week.
So it's not a new
Education is
idea.
Part of it, no. Education is one of our topics in our chairs meeting every week, and every single week I make sure to mention that while you're redoing education, that there's this big impact on transportation, but we as a committee have to figure out what we are going to do, which is what we're heading into the transportation study after this, and then in the committee discussion on Friday for our long-term all session is what is going to need to be done. But I want us to make sure that we get as much of your opinion on this, particularly page 53, that we can get out of you in this last 10 minutes of, we have a couple of quick questions, we'll do that, but go ahead and Representative Lally, but we want to hear your opinion on these things as much as possible
Yeah,
before we go.
to just kind of echo the concerns that Rep. White raised, I'd say another cost of our inability to sort of use state funds to do more things is the impacts on our walking and biking network in our communities.
Mhm.
Because if communities are using federal money originally, that comes with that comes with NEPA requirements, which are extremely expensive to comply with, and actually depresses demand for these. And I'm thinking about how does all of that, because the capacity to comply with this differs, particularly in rural communities. So how does that then translate to our inability to have vibrant, prosperous communities? And then how does that affect tax receipts? So I think this is a profound issue that has many tentacles.
Yeah, how does it, what do those requirements do that make them
Right, well, just in a
less
nutshell,
attractive and all the rest?
if you are accepting federal dollars
Yeah.
to build a sidewalk or whatever, you have to go through NEPA review because
Okay.
that's a requirement. And that has to happen before anything can be scoped.
Okay,
And so that adds
cost.
a big cost. It can
Okay.
add, it can inflate the cost of building this infrastructure, which we're trying to put in the right places so we can have more low emissions communities that never create emissions in the first place.
Sure.
And have robust transit and it's all,
Do they end up being bigger or different in a way that makes them less attractive for use, or is it
well,
more
that
the
that
cost?
can happen. And
Yeah.
then there are objections on the part of people in communities, because I don't want something that doesn't look context appropriate in my
Right,
little village or something like
Okay.
that. So yes, things end up being sort of supersized and overbuilt. We're working on that with our state standards.
yeah,
So, that
Okay.
has been understood as a challenge and we're addressing it. But I'm interested in the funding of these
Mhm,
things, and how do we, again, do more with less, but
Mhm.
have smarter investments. And,
Yeah.
if you can have a community that is more livable, that can help the community, prosper in many different ways and also attract other essential state investments, such
Mhm.
as for wastewater to enable housing to be built in these
Right.
communities and water infrastructure and all this other stuff,
Right.
So that communities get to sort of be part of the game, basically,
mhm.
going forward. So
Yeah.
I think this is really profound. And this ties into, while we're on the topic of education, how we pay for education. and having enough butts and seats basically in the schools,
Mhm.
which is a challenge, and delivery of healthcare, lots of other services. So, I'm just very glad we're having this discussion. Appreciate
Mhm.
the opportunity to speak on it for a moment.
Yeah, good, good.
Representative Howe?
Yes, I think, I totally agree that when there's federal funds available, we ought to go after as much or all of it as possible. But I think what it does is it takes our transportation program and it starts to focus everything on what can we use federal funds for, which are redoing bridges and stuff, not paving, not supporting municipalities.
Mhm.
Those federal funds can't be used for that. So I think, in our effort to go after the federal funds, which is the right thing to do, we then reduce what's available for other transportation needs, and I would say municipalities. So every time we want to provide money for municipalities, it's state money.
Mhm.
And I think the AOT, rightfully so, is saying all this, the first thing we're going to use the state money for is federal money.
Mhm.
And then whatever's left over,
Mhm.
we'll deal with the state.
Yeah, yeah.
We'll deal with the other things that don't have federal money.
yeah. So real complexities with using federal money in the mix. There's one more line.
I want to get back to page 53 and hear more. Thank you.
No, but we're close to the end of that. The last one is other revenues, and that's a catch-all for lots and lots of things. That can be very erratic, but again, it's only, there's some things that are business related that, that with the economy, with the economy growing, you might have a little bit more in the way of permitting and various fines and stuff like that. But it's, again, not growing a lot. So it's motor vehicle purchase and use that's giving you any kind of juice, and that's a problem. So that's the fund you're working.
So, Tom, if there was this 3% that you mentioned, 3% growth, if there were a slowdown, does it hit that particular fund the quickest in terms of people putting off purchases and whatnot? They have to buy their gasoline because they still got to get to work or whatnot. Do we have?
Yeah, but you do have less like diesel use if commerce slows.
Okay, so
you're not.
too, but does it hit this purchase and use quicker?
Oh yeah, because disposable income is, so people, it depends why things slow down. But for example, if there's fear right now, there's fear that some of the new policies will increase inflation. So the Fed has felt like good enough about inflation to drop interest rates 100 basis points from September to December, but now they're on hold because there's concern about what might happen. So interest rates affect new car purchases and all car purchases, but especially new car purchases. And high interest rates, all other things being equal, is going to diminish demand for that. So if interest rates don't go down, some small percentage of people are even chatting about they might raise them next year. That would be bad for motor vehicle purchase and use sales. Inventories have been a problem though, so availability of vehicles is still a problem. It was started in the pandemic, but still the inventory on dealers' lots is way lower than usual. And so, production has really sort of scaled back. But if you start throwing tariffs around, there are very few, I don't think there's any vehicle that's 100% made in the United States. So there are always components and things. And the manufacturers have been stockpiling parts and things because they expect there to be potential shortages. And so it could be, the tariffs could throw a wrench into that. That would affect those.
What about the potential of that availability of stock? If we are heading into some of the rules that are in place, this clean car piece and what we're starting to hear recently, what other things besides just an economic slowdown, tariffs you mentioned, things like that stock issue in terms of us impacting the amount of vehicles that are or are not available in Vermont? What are other things that can drive up or down this? Only, you're painting that as the most positive of our revenue opportunities. What are the other potential negative impacts to that? What else could hit that and make it and not be our saving grace right now? What else?
Well, you know, one of the things that actually is good about the structure, even though it's kind of dead in the water in terms of growth, is that, you know, it's not like people just because times are bad. I mean, eventually a long period of times being bad, you probably get people would stop registering cars and things like, oh, I don't use that car that much or something like that. But you don't have as much downside either because they're just fees that you pay all the time. You need a driver's license, you need, you know, all this stuff. So there's not as much downside vulnerability except to motor vehicle purchase and use. You know, that's if you're linked to the economy and people's income and stuff, it's going to fluctuate more, but long term, it's going to grow more. So
On the purchase and use, the concerns that are being raised in regards to availability of vehicles on dealer lots in Vermont.
yeah, but that's nationwide, so it's not like we have a problem that anybody else doesn't
Are
have.
we making potentially a law different in that terms of the electric availability or whatnot? Or what will have, we heard pieces that what may or may not be available with the rollout of 2026 may be impacted significantly on Vermont lots.
If I might, but if there's less vehicles here because of that, people buy it in New Hampshire. They come here, they gotta pay that anyway. So no matter where you buy your vehicle,
So
it's
we,
whoever wants. to
Are you
rent
saying
it.
though there's things in Vermont that are limiting vehicles on the lots that other states aren't doing?
that's what we're starting to hear, that there potentially could impact
Really?
what's rolling in.
What kind of,
Because of the amount of electric vehicles that will be required, that the new delivery of electric vehicles into Vermont has to hit a certain target. And in order to do that, they have a choice to either buy credits. Or they're going to have to limit the amount of ICE.
The
that they bring in.
California standard.
It's the
Vermont
ratio.
impacted.
You're gonna have X amount of electric cars versus gas powered.
right, but
They're-
who pays the penalty?
That's the,
Who is it? The manufacturer?
Manufacturer.
That's a fact.
but you're right, that if they do buy it somewhere else and bring it over here, they
They
still have to pay it.
register it anyway,
But
so.
that may
Yeah.
impact dealerships, but it may not, and may or may not impact the total number.
Yeah, well, EV is such a little part of the market. It's just, it's not going to be seismic, but on the edges.
The amount of, potentially, the dealers would limit the amount of internal combustion engine vehicles
To
on
try
the
to get
lot,
to that,
to make sure they have the right ratio of electric vehicles.
to other
But
ones.
what Representative Pouch is saying, that if they do go to New Hampshire to buy them, they still have to pay
Yeah.
the tax when they come in, but it does have an impact on the activity in that sector in the state. Okay.
Yeah, that's interesting. I should look into that a little bit more just to see if I think that's going to be material. I wasn't aware that there was, you know, something that could change how that would work. But you're right. If you're buying whatever you're buying, if they don't have as many gas ones, they're trying to do it. They pull in the cars from everywhere. You can buy the car anywhere, and the marketplace for vehicles is different with, you know, internet-based information.
The impact on revenue most likely would be the same. Potentially.
Probably would be.
I just wanted to.
No, but I'm thinking
But it's an
through this
impact
because
on
I
what-
wasn't aware of that.
I just-
Yeah, yeah. I'll look into it more too. Yeah.
Representative Byrd?
Well, now we're paying the infrastructure fee for the EVs are now paying.
Right.
Our.
Yes,
our-
you get a hit.
And going eventually towards the
Mileage.
vehicle, what are the MBU?
Miles driven.
Mileage-based user fee.
So that should be a plus.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, you can have more, I don't know if the companies share them, but you also can get much more detailed information about, you know, about what's happening with a car, with an electric one, because everything's, you know, monitored. They know how many miles you've driven and where you've driven if they want to. You know, you saw this with that Tesla that burned in front of the hotel, and, you know, they knew right where he went, where he charged, where he got, you know, everything. Tesla knows that, and the other EV manufacturers have a lot of connectivity centralized. Yeah. Anyway. Yeah. Yeah, we are getting a little bit of money from that EV thing, and that's in the B thing too, but that's kind of a one step up, and that's just a 2-year
And
thing.
it's just going.
I understand
actually
it.
for, Charging infrastructure,
Yeah,
we dedicate for that.
Yeah.
That's our,
But
it's,
But certainly on the table, is the mileage-based user fee, which, really, looks at that gasoline. It incorporates that for EVs, some user fee like a
Mhm.
gasoline fee.
Mhm.
And there's also some studies showing that, some more rural areas will benefit. It'll cost less than, than other people that drive less.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, so anyways, versus paying for gasoline, so.
There are always winners and losers
Yeah.
with whatever you guys decide with something. And this is true about the economy in general. Inflation's bad, right? But there are entities that are just cleaning up, If you can pass prices on, you have market power, you can raise prices and your profits go up, your margins go up. If you can't, you're in a very competitive industry, you're a loser, or you're a worker that's part of a union, you're getting wage increases that are way above inflation. The UPS settlement, some of the nursing things, all that, you're in good shape. But if you're, not unionized and not where there's a labor shortage, you have very little power to affect wages and you're probably way behind inflation. So everybody's experience depends on where you're sitting in the mix of things.
Okay. Is there any other parts you want to highlight to us in the?
I mean, I can go on as long as you want, but there's all kinds of interesting stuff down at a detail level. But if questions arise, you can contact me afterwards to our joint fiscal and pass them on. And we're happy to help with whatever issues you're trying to deal with during the sessions.
Well, I thank you very much for fitting us into your very busy schedule this,
Thank
Appreciate all the questions from the members.